Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, I have two special guests, State Senator Rob Teplitz from the 15th Senatorial District and Patti. He heads the Pennsylvania Business Council. I'll see if I can get them to disagree. That might not be too hard. Back in a moment.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, in a couple of sentences, Harrisburg is a wild and crazy place, a lot going on. A new governor, as I think everybody knows. The Republicans control the legislature. We're going to see how that works out over the course of the next couple of months. Joining me is a guest we have fairly regularly on the program, State Senator Rob Teplitz. He represents a district in south central Pennsylvania, a 15th Senatorial District. Senator, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, it's a kind of interesting time in Harrisburg. What I've talked about this before, and before we get into some specifics, the atmosphere is different. There's a kind of conviviality. I don't know if that's the word I want to use, but it seems like everybody says, can we work together, live together, and see if we can work things out? Am I right about that?
I think you're right. I think there's a general sense from both parties that we do have a fresh start. I mean, to use a phrase that the governor used during his campaign, this is an opportunity for us to try to work together on both sides of the aisle in all branches of government to try to get some things done.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's start with a couple of the issues that there seems to be. Look, the governor-elect, number one, the governor-elect, how often did we say that, right? The governor wants to do a shale tax. He wants to increase education spending. He's going to look at the priorities of the state. The Republicans that control the legislature want to do pension reform, liquor privatization. Both sides have said, and you're in these discussions, can we find compromise? If you had to go through the two or three things you think where compromise can be reached, what would you say?
Well, I think we have to start with the premise. We've got a $2 billion, maybe even more hole in the budget, and we've got to fill that. And at the same time, we're also trying to invest more in certain areas like public education, job creation, some other areas. And so that creates its own challenge. I think that drives some consensus towards a shale tax. Mm-hmm. That shale tax, even at a modest level, won't fill that hole entirely, but it gets us, maybe a quarter of the way there. Then we're going to have to look at where we can bring in more revenues or possibly cut, but I'm not sure there is anything else to cut.
Well, the outgoing administration, just before they left office, their Secretary of the Budget, Charles Zogby, who's a guest on this program on a number of occasions, said that they thought they had reached, I think he used the word, reached a wall about where they can go. Cuts will be unpopular. Can the structural deficit be pushed out and resolved over time, or is it something, that has to be dealt with, do you think, in some way?
I think we have to. We have to constitutionally, but we also have to because many of us agree with the governor's priorities of investing more in certain areas, but we've got to dig ourselves out of the hole we're already in. That's going to require a balanced budget. The shale tax is an obvious place. Maybe there are some other sources of revenue. There may be areas of government where we can streamline and cut costs. Cutting costs to government as opposed to cutting costs to social services programs and things that affect real people, which I think have taken enough of a hit over the last 4 years.
Yeah, one of the issues that I hear, it's really controversial, has to do with pension reform. Some have said that long-term debt, $60 billion. There's various ideas about how to resolve it. Probably chat with Patti about that in a moment as well. There's the idea, well, why don't we just float bonds? And there's some, we've talked about that before on this program. In fact, last week, it's a little dicey about how that works versus a 401k style hybrid plan for new employees. Is there any sense that and Republican leaders have put the gauntlet down, and one thing they've been pretty firm about on that, is that a potential area for compromise, or is that something more likely to be put. I'm not asking you easy questions, am I?
Right. Well, I think, with the pension issue, the discussion has to focus on addressing the cost to the taxpayers of the pensions.
Right.
The discussion up till now has been more of an ideological argument, because changing, as many of the Republican leaders want to do, changing from the pension as it is now to a 401k style plan doesn't actually save the state money. Mm-hmm. It's an ideological argument. We could have those till the end of time and not resolve those. We need to get back to a discussion: how does the state meet its commitment, which it historically has not, of putting in its share of the pension?
Okay. We're going to run to a break. When we come back, Senator Teplitz is involved in a reform commission. We now have, by the way, an executive order in which there is a gift ban for executive employees in the executive branch. The legislature, well, we're going to get into that to see what that and some other reforms that the senator and a bipartisan caucus has been working on. We'll do that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, I'm chatting with Rob Teplitz, State Senator Rob Teplitz from the 15th Senatorial District in South Central Pennsylvania, for those of you, our viewers around the state. All right, Senator, no one would ever accuse the Pennsylvania legislature of being reformist-minded. I know I don't want to put you on the spot. You have to go back and work with your colleagues. But can't we just say a gift ban, now you have to report it. Can't we just say in the legislature you shouldn't be taking gifts? What do you think?
I agree. Many of us agree. The Government Reform Caucus, which I founded and which I co-chair, has coalesced around an approach to the gift issue. The first step would be increasing disclosure, but in other states that has led to a culture of not having gifts and ultimately a gift ban. Yeah. So that's where I'd like to see us go, and I was very happy to see Governor Wolf take on this issue immediately after taking office.
Well, it should be known that Governor Casey, got elected in 1986, re-elected in 1980. You didn't fool around with gifts, and Governor Casey's in the executive branch. He was a real straight arrow, and then it seemed to have gone a little sideways with these gifts. I mean, we can talk about that, but it just leads. It's the appearance in some cases, right? It's the appearance of an impropriety often, because I don't think most lawmakers are on the take. I mean, we've had some problem with some in the past, but most try to do it. All right, if you had your way, give me one or two other reforms or changes that you would like to see take place in the legislature.
Well, I've been working on trying to eliminate the automatic midterm COLA, the cost of living allowance for legislators. I think that whatever your salary is on the first day of office should be your salary for that term, and have the public then judge for the next term whether you deserve an increase. You
would have to vote on that increase, or you would have a COLA after the...
It would be automatic. It would be automatic, but it would begin with the new term.
Yeah, that sort of makes some sense. I get your point. That the COLA that we're talking about was put in 1995 with another legislative pay hack that was also, how popular legislative pay hikes are. All right, give me another one.
Another one is requiring receipts for the per diem expenses that legislators get.
Tell our viewers.
Legislators who are from outside of the Capitol get a set amount of money for their food and their hotel and their expenses when they're in town for legislative business. But they can spend that lump sum however they want, and a lot of times it's more than the amount that it actually costs them. So then they get to pocket the difference, and taxpayers correctly believe that that's not appropriate.
Yeah. All right, before I let you go, one other issue that I think has come up from time to time, and that's lobbyist reform. The rules tend to be a little weak. It's not one that overly bothers me as long as they're reporting. Is there any adjustments that you think ought to be made to that, or are you fairly content with that?
No, I think we can do better on that. I have a bill that would ban state agencies from hiring outside lobbyists to lobby other state agencies.
That doesn't seem to make any sense.
It doesn't, but it happens,
Really?
and it's a cost to the taxpayers that's not appropriate when these agencies have staff, state employees that should be doing that job themselves.
Yeah, and the other thing that the governor, the new governor did, which seemed appropriate to me, was if you're going to hire outside legal counsel, why not bid them? And you know, we have a lot of good lawyers. Instead of, you know, often certain deals that get made, and, you know, except in emergency situations. Does that also make a lot of sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, we need to have openness and transparency in how the state spends its money. And the state spends a lot of money on professional services, lawyers and others, and it should just be done in an open way.
All right, well, we're going to have an interesting time, March 3rd, the big day. D-Day, I call it, the budget. You'll have you back, and we'll discuss the budget, and hopefully you'll have discussions before that. All right, State Senator Rob Teplitz. Now we're going to have Patti, Pennsylvania Business Council. He comes on here a good bit. We're going to chat with him. We'll get the business point of view. We'll talk about some of these same issues, see what Patti thinks about those after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
All right, joining me now is Patti with the Pennsylvania Business Council. He heads that organization. All right, you just heard Senator Teplitz talk about the state budget and some of the things that are obviously going to be part of the discussions throughout the course of the spring. Let's start with the general situation. $2 billion structural deficit. The outgoing administration said we've probably hit a wall. What's your sense of the budget situation?
Well, it will be interesting to watch that play out. Coming into the end of the year, we were talking about $2 billion. The Wolf people have said, well, maybe it's 2.3, 2.4. It strategically behooves an incoming administration to make that budget deficit sound as big as possible. First of all, that will help their legacy later on that they overcame it. But secondly,
and also to make the case for new revenue.
It makes the case for new revenue.
Yeah.
If you're going to go big and go early,
Yeah.
in taxes. So if do it in your first year because you have 4 years to make up for it. And frankly, if they try and go for a bigger tax increase now, and the situation isn't as bad as they make it out to be, that means there'll be kind of found money surpluses, if not this year, in future years.
And lots of past administrations have done that.
Republicans
right?
and Democrats.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the game.
Yeah.
And the way we have the budget situation legally set up in Pennsylvania is that the governor sets what is the expectation for revenues for the year, and everybody else who plays a role in the budget has to assume that that's correct.
Yeah.
Now, today we have more data, there's more transparency, we have the independent fiscal office, which helps. So they can't play quite the games they used to play. But there's some wiggle room in there, so I expect them to want a higher tax increase, and they'll base it on in part on that deficit.
Well, I mean, the tax that that Senator Teplitz talked about, that we've been talking about on the show, the severance tax, business community, not to put it bluntly, not crazy about it. I'll just be honest about that. Differences about that. Is that a possible area of compromise? To get pensions done, I mean, is that something? You followed the legislature for years.
I think the senator is right that there were a growing number of people calling for something like a severance tax. Now, I think our impact fee that we called a fee so that Governor Corbett didn't raise any tax was a tax.
Yeah.
It goes
this
already.
This is a fee on each well, by the way, that raises about $200 million a year.
Right. And the money is distributed largely to the municipalities in which the drilling is occurring. So Governor Wolf likes to talk about externalities. This is a fee very much designed to address the externalities, what an economist would call an externality, social cost of having the drilling. Now, some of that money gets spread out. Governor Wolf and others would like to have more money and spread it more across the states and not just to the communities where the drilling is. The law that we passed with the impact fee says that if we ever do a different kind of tax, that fee goes away. Now, they can undo that portion of the law,
right.
but would we really vote to take money away? But the other thing we have to know is with oil now at $50 a barrel,
yeah, the amount of money,
the price of energy is just dropping so much.
So the severance tax wouldn't probably bring in as much.
In Texas, they are closing down oil drilling. Now, natural gas is a little bit different than oil, but it's related. That right now the demand for energy and coupled with the price of energy, whether or not that severance tax would bring in the revenue that Governor Wolf thinks is certainly something that's arguable.
Yeah. Well, look, the most talk that we've heard about for a year, and it's even some Republicans. I mean, this isn't partisan, I think. What about education spending?
Right.
I mean, that's an issue that we hear a lot about routinely.
Right.
And it looks like that's going to be the major priority for the Wolf administration. So does that mean they're going to have to
and you know what? I think it would have been the major priority for a Corbett administration also. We're just at that point where we have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And it's another one where facts are stubborn things. Pennsylvania spends more on education per student than many, many states on average. Now, it's not to say it's the same in all 500 school districts.
Yeah.
We pay our teachers very, very well. It's also true that the states, what comes out of state revenues versus local revenues is lower in Pennsylvania than in many, many other states. So there are inequities in the system. There are those who argue we're not putting enough money completely into the system. I look at it and say, well, between local resources, state resources, and federal resources, we're spending $27 billion a year now. I want to make sure kids can read, write, do math. So let's get some reforms there. And we have to look at cost drivers. You mentioned pension in relationship to severance. It's also related here. School districts are having problems making...
And municipalities are increasingly...
But schools and the state are having a hard time making their share of that pension payment.
All right, I'm talking with Dave Patti. When we come back, I want to ask him about something that you're going to have to face. You're going to see it on the ballot. 3 Supreme Court vacancies will be occurring next year. And guess what? 16 people at least running for these 3. Can you make any sense about it? Dave Patti will help us out.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
Well, this is a subject we have not broached on this program. It's the Supreme Court elections, historic 3 vacancies. I think you have to go back to the 18th century in Pennsylvania to find a time we had 3 Supreme Court vacancies, 7 total. 16 people running. Dave Patti, will anybody be able to make any sense of this?
Well, the state parties are starting to go through that process right now with their endorsements, and they're trying to make sense of who do they want to run. Now, their assessment of candidates is going to be different than mine.
Yeah.
They will look at probably geographic balance. Conveniently with 3, you could go a Pittsburgher, a Philadelphian, and a Central Pennsylvanian. They will look at gender
Some sense
balance.
to that. Go ahead.
They will try and see that their tickets have
gender
and racial diversity. So we would expect to see some of that. I want to know, of course, where people stand, and a lot of folks don't talk to candidates about their views or think that they can't. They're certainly legally allowed to talk about their views. I press them to do so. So I want to know, will they help advance legal reform? How do they approach local government versus state government, preemption issues?
You're talking about sort of generalities. Under a Supreme Court decision a few years ago, judicial candidates are now permitted to say more than they used to be able to say. Although in this state, we
can't
still
say,
have,
you know, in the case of Madonna versus Lancaster, how would you rule, you know, if the case is still pending?
But you could talk generically and try to determine.
Well, and I think, you know, Act 13, the law that set up not only the impact fee, but also basically preemption on how on is it the state or local governments that decide how to drill. The Supreme Court handed down a pretty historic ruling there, saying that the constitutional guarantee of clean water, clean air, you know, clean environment is vested with the municipalities rather than the state. That's a big deal, and there is an old federal. From the 1850s, a precedent from the federal courts known as Dillon's Rule that says municipalities are the creatures of the state. Well,
so
that's an academic question I want to ask. Right.
All right, I'm going to really put you on the spot. The voters of the state like the electoral process. There are a lot of folks in certain reform groups that say the voters, you know, and I used to poll on them. I don't anymore because the voters don't know much about them. They can't raise enough money. Should we go to another system? Should it be appointed? You
know, if there's appointed, there's another set of politics, and those of us who play politics will play in that system too. So I don't think it gets rid of the politics.
I get your point. You know, so you're saying even if it's appointed, there'll be politics.
There'll be politics.
Be just a different kind of politics.
Actually, you know, there's an interesting piece out there from the dean of the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Georgia, who's both a lawyer and a political scientist. She wrote a piece that looked at the responsiveness of elected versus appointed judges to the legislature and to the people and to the governors. And she found that the rulings of elected judges more likely track the views of the electorate rather than the appointing agency like the governor or the General Assembly.
Do you think that makes them so independent they don't pay attention to, you know?
Susan Gantman, who's now the president judge of the Superior Court, had
in Pennsylvania.
I had a conversation with her. Her election years ago actually ended up in kind of a hung decision for a while while they recounted votes. And she said, you know, I wasn't thrilled about having to go out on the road all over Pennsylvania, but I grew up in the Southeast.
She got to know
I went
people.
to school in the Southeast, in law school. I practiced in the Southeast.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have known the rest of the state.
Yeah, now
so
now she gets
I think there's
out.
something to be said.
And just for everybody, the judges are elected 10 years. They stand for not traditional re-election, but it's a yes/no vote after 10 years, and then there's I almost knocked my drink off, a 70-year term limit on age right now.
Right now. The last session, actually, the General Assembly passed a resolution that if it would be passed again and then sent to the people, could take the age up to 75.
All right. I'm going to try not to spill my drink. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.